Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Robert Doar, president of AEI, and I'd like to welcome you to Ed the Right Way, an AEI education event featuring Virginia Secretary of Education Aimee Guidera. I don't always come to education events or all the events at AEI, but they do trot me out for important events of this kind. We have a very important new participant in the public debate on an issue that we care about a lot. And that's the case here in education and with Secretary Guidera. She has had a long and distinguished career in educational advocacy. In 2012, Time magazine called her one of the 12 education activists of the year. She has served on the boards of several educational advocacy groups, such as America Succeeds and the Institute for Educational Leadership. She was also founder, president, and CEO of the Data Quality Campaign, a nationwide effort to improve the quality of information available to students, parents, educators, and policymakers. After Governor Youngkin was elected on a platform of reforming Virginia's schools, he nominated Secretary Guidera to be his Secretary of Education last December. In this role, she oversees all pre-K to post-secondary public education in the state. Like those of us at AEI, she is a believer in providing parents options and choice, and she understands the important, indeed vital role that parents play in providing a good education for their children. We'll hear first from Secretary Guidera, and then she will be joined by Rick Hess, our very distinguished and long-standing Director of Education Policy Studies, for a brief discussion before we move into Q&A from all of you. So I'd like to thank once again Secretary Guidera for joining this event and Rick and his team for putting it together. Secretary Guidera.
Thank you so much, Robert. And I'm glad that they trot you out for education events. It's the place to be, I hear, these days. So thank you for
right.
And AEI serves such an important role as a beacon for grounding and for providing guidance in a country which seems increasingly adrift and perhaps even headed to the rocks and for the rocks these days. AEI scholars and fellows provide knowledge, analysis, and insights that I have long valued. And to help shape my thinking. And I know from experience, I know Governor Youngkin as well values AEI. In fact, last week at dawn, I awoke to my phone buzzing. And in fact, it was him texting me about an article that Rick had just put out. So I know he's reading AEI and following the scholars as well. And AEI's conservative and bipartisan reform education networks also provide unique forums to develop not only the ideas, but also relationships. And this is particularly important for conservatives in an overwhelmingly liberal education sector. On a professional note, I want to applaud the leadership development opportunities that the network affords. And they are, in fact, highlighted wonderfully right now in Virginia's new education team. Not only am I a member of the Conservative Education Reform Network, but so is Superintendent Jillian Balow, so is her Chief of Staff, Dickie Shaner, and so is our new Deputy Secretary for K-12, Mackenzie Snow. So the leadership development is awesome at AEI. Keep it up, and we'll keep growing it in Virginia as well. And also, as a personal note, as a mom and an aunt, I also appreciate AEI's outreach efforts to build connections and communities on our college campuses. One of our daughters has served as an AEI Executive Council member on her campus. Another of our daughters just interviewed to take part in AEI's summer fellowship, and our niece transitioned from one of the summer programs and being an active campus leader now into an AEI full-time staff member. So we are all in the Guidera family on AEI. So thanks on a professional level and on a personal level for providing such leadership and inspiration. I've seen firsthand how important it is to expose our youth to the rich deep dives into ideas and principles that are foundational to our nation and which are discussions that are increasingly not part of their formal education. Not only is it vital for their development as scholars, but also for the future of our economy, of our democracy, and of our way of life. So thank you. Thank you to the entire AEI team for what you do to ensure that the words that I get to read every morning when I walk into the office, to make sure that they're not just a historic artifact. And here's a fun fact. My great new office doesn't just overlook the Capitol and the Executive Mansion, but it's actually in the old Library of Virginia building. And there are quotations from 4 Virginians who went on to be US presidents. And my favorite of these quotes is one from Thomas Jefferson. Free inquiry and reason are the natural enemies of error. Let me read that again. Free inquiry and reason are the natural enemies of error. These words are not just decoration at the top of our office building. They are the foundation for Governor Youngkin's education agenda. And I'm so pleased to be with you today to provide an overview of our vision, our priorities, and our goals. And I'm honored and delighted, really honored and really delighted to be a part of the governor's team as he works to make Virginia the best place to live, to work, and to raise a family. And on this call, we all know that for that goal to become a reality, Virginia also needs to be the best place to learn. So everything that we do in the next 4 years in the Youngkin administration will be guided by our North Star to prepare every single learner for success in life, in our economy, our democracy, and in our communities. Everything we do in education will be shaped by this goal. And how will we know we'll be successful in the long term? We have 3 benchmarks we're going to use. 1, graduates of Virginia education institutions will be hired into family wage supporting jobs, and they'll be actively engaged and productively engaged in civic life. 2, companies will be attracted to, remain in, and grow in the Commonwealth due to the quality of the talent pool. And 3, the Virginia economy will grow. One of the most shocking parts about my introduction into this job is the reaction that the Commonwealth, so many people in the Commonwealth have had to the governor's goal of restoring excellence to education. Members of the General Assembly, our education associations and institutions, and the media want to continue to extol Virginia as the best. And yet the data doesn't back this up. We're resting on our laurels and being deluded by averages that mask the stark disparities in the quality of education and in the results that we're getting across the Commonwealth. You know, I thought I had left Lake Wobegon, that place you all know, where the women are strong, the men are beautiful, and all the children are above average. I thought I'd left that all behind me when I transplanted from Minnesota. But boy, is it alive and still well in the Commonwealth. And if you look at our trend lines and at our disaggregated data, it is apparent that we are not serving all students well, not at any level, but we can and we will. Here are a couple of facts about the concerning trends that we're working to turn around. First, we need to start talking about learning loss. And I don't mean unfinished learning, as it's increasingly called. I'm talking about learning loss and our students' urgent need for learning recovery. The Center for Assessment Analysis showed in several states that they studied that the pandemic learning loss is 2 to 3 times greater than that we saw at Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. And other studies continue to show that this is more so even in Virginia. One study showed that our pandemic learning loss in math was 7% worse than it is in other places around the nation. And Virginia's learners were already struggling to meet rigorous standards. Well, yes, we do perform above the average on NAEP. Student proficiency in English and reading, as measured by our own state standards, the standards of learning, was already declining. More than 40% of Virginia's students are not proficient in 2nd grade. And among those students that need learning recovery, 20%, 1% more Black and 22% more Hispanic are not performing as well as compared to white students. And not surprisingly, when students graduate, they're not prepared for the life after school. In fact, public high school graduates going into community college directly 13% require remediation in English and 15% require remediation in math. And new data that came out just last week from the College Board showed that while Virginia used to be number 3 in the nation of producing AP scores number 3 and above, we now just fall, and we were 3rd in the nation at that point. We're now down to 9 since 2015. Every single one of our trends is going down with student achievement, but also in what the impact that's having on our economic recovery. We are placed number 45 across the entire nation for recovering from the pandemic in our economic position. And right now we have over 300,000 jobs, mostly in the high skill, high wage jobs that remain unfilled. And why? We don't have the talent and the capacity to fill them. We have to do better. We need to do better. So how are we going to turn around these downward trends and turn them around and also get closer to that North Star? We will have an unwavering focus on creating a best-in-class education system from early learning through post-secondary education, and that we will ensure every learner is prepared for jobs in the knowledge economy. Our work will be focused on achieving measurable results, meeting every student where she is, and prioritizing those that we know are furthest behind. We will leverage evidence, and we will leverage emerging best practices so we can expedite progress and keep on track. Over the next 7 minutes, I'd like to share with you some of our foundational beliefs, the principles that will guide how we will work, and the non-negotiables to our approach. And along the way, I'll offer a few examples of the work that Superintendent Balo and I are launching. I look forward to diving into any areas of interest that you'd like to go deeper into during this discussion session with Rick, and also questions and answers with you. So let's start. There are 4 foundational beliefs that will guide our work to restore excellence in education and to prepare all learners for success. The first one and the second one are really important, and they go together. First, every student deserves to be held to high expectations, and we will prioritize resources and attention to those students and communities who are furthest behind. This isn't an either or, this is a both. And third and fourth, those closest to students, parents, and teachers matter, and we will make sure that they matter. So let's start with high expectations. We are doubling down on our standards-based approach to education by ensuring that our standards of learning are aligned with the content and skill needs of the 21st century and 21st century knowledge economy. Math and history are the 2 critical subjects that are next in the queue of our 7-year review process. And this provides a wonderful opportunity for us to ensure that our expectations for leaving school and our expectations around mastery and knowledge and skills and competencies are aligned to the changing and increasingly rigorous demands of our economy. We will do this by ensuring there is a more robust review process that includes enhanced opportunities for input from stakeholders and experts, and a thoughtful benchmarking against leading states and national and international efforts. Our reviewers, who have typically just been teachers, which is important to do, will now be expanded to include not only customers of the system, such as employers, military, and higher education, to ensure that there's alignment with entrance requirements, but we will also include national content experts, Commonwealth professors, and our directors of education at our cultural and historical treasures who possess expertise in subject matter. Shouldn't we want the education directors at Gunston Hall helping us shape how we teach about the Bill of Rights? Or the director at Fort Monroe, where the first Africans set foot in America as enslaved people, to help shape our history standards? I sure do. Around literacy and those numbers that are so terrible I just read to you. The governor just signed yesterday one of the signature bills of our legislative session, the Literacy Act. This law is based on a transformative effort led by Mississippi that's resulted in the nation's greatest improvements on literacy scores across all demographics on the NAEP test. This approach is evidence-based and it's proven. We will transform our teacher training in our schools of education to be based on the science of reading, and literacy coaches will be deployed across the Commonwealth to train and to retrain current teachers and introduce new curriculum and tools that are proven and science-based. As our data makes clear, we are in a crisis, and this new law and the governor's commitment to invest in learning recovery will help us change the trajectory of students' lives by ensuring they can read and read by 3rd grade. Second of all, parents matter. Anyone watching this campaign for the governor fought and has watched our first 3 months in office know that parents matter and they will continue to matter. We know that parents are a child's first and most important teachers, and we will never forget that parents are critical partners in the education of their children, and they have a right to be included in decisions about their child's education, health, and well-being. As such, the Department of Education will be launching a new parent resource center, which is focused on ensuring parents are informed and confident partners and champions in their child's education. Research tells us this, and we all know from our own personal experience, that parents turn to their child's teacher for information and trusted advice, as it should be. Therefore, as part of this work in a new resource center, we will be creating materials and trainings for teachers to be prepared to work in partnership with parents. This will focus on everything from making the parent-teacher conference a conversation focused on improvement and actionable steps that parents and teachers can take together with students, to making data more understandable and actionable so that everyone is focused on how do we improve student achievement. Educators matter. Research tells us also that after a mother's education level, the most determinant factor of academic success for a student is the access to a high-quality teacher. We are going to make historic investments in the Commonwealth of Virginia to nurture, to increase, and to support quality teachers and professors. Virginia is already 9th in the nation for the number of national board certified teachers, and we're going to continue to invest in that approach, as well as learning from other states who have built stronger talent pipelines, such as Grow Your Own, or looking at different residencies and coaching. But this investment will also include addressing the need for greater diversity in our educator workforce to better reflect the student population. We're currently reviewing certification and licensure processes to facilitate content experts to switch careers more easily and join the teaching profession where we have so many shortages, and help folks that want to transition from the military or other fields to go into this noble profession of teaching. As we pursue these goals, we will define quality and quality teachers primarily as having a measurable impact on student learning. Let me say that again. We will define quality teachers as defined by the impact they have in the classroom on their students' learning. That shouldn't be revolutionary, and yet it is. So, second part, how will we work? What are the principles that are going to guide how we make decisions and how we lead? First, our education system at all levels will be held accountable for preparing all learners for success in life. This starts with a quality assessment system that provides timely, actionable, trusted information. Bipartisan legislation this session establishes a work group around the development of a state-of-the-art assessment that will embrace both a commitment to proficiency and to growth. And as part of our commitment to provide quality information from our assessment system, we will ensure that our cut scores from our statewide tests are aligned with the demands of the real world. Many of you will remember the honesty gap analysis that Achieve used to produce that showed the difference between NAEP proficiency rates and state test proficiency rates. You might remember that over the past 10 years, 17 states have raised their cut scores once they were told that they had an honesty gap, so that their citizens could know that a passing score means that their students are on track. But sadly, Virginia in 2019 still had the lowest baseline for proficiency on the standardized tests in 4th grade reading and math and in 8th grade reading, according to a study by the National Center for Education Statistics. That meant that if you looked at a Virginia test, it would tell you that 75% of 4th graders had a reading pass rate in 2019. But if you looked at that same year's test on NAEP, it would tell you that only 38% of 4th graders were proficient. We're not telling the truth about where our students are, and that's going to stop. We are going to make sure everyone knows where we have problems, what the issues are, so that we can also take actions to change those issues. We cannot afford to lose another generation. The linchpin to a standards-based education system is strong accountability. We cannot allow students to be condemned to stay in a school that is failing them. We will work with the state board and the legislature to ensure that families will no longer be required to stay in an unaccredited school that is not producing results as measured by student learning. It is unconscionable, and it is just plain wasteful of dollars, of time, and most importantly, of lives to keep students in schools that are not preparing them for life. We will hold the system accountable for results. Our second key principle, we know that transparency builds trust and informed action. Therefore, evidence will drive every decision we make. Students, parents, educators, administrators, and policymakers need timely, quality, and accurate data to make decisions that result in students succeeding. This includes information about what's being taught in our schools, materials being used in our classrooms, as well as data on both resource allocation and, most importantly, results. And we're talking about results not only as academic achievement results, but also the feedback results on how well prepared graduates at every level are for the next thing, whether it be readiness for high school or whether it be how they're doing once they graduate and go to college, a military, or a job. And anyone who knows me won't be surprised that we are going to use data as a central part of our strategy. We are going to harness the power of information to fuel better decision-making and to fuel better results. One of the pieces that the superintendent and I are most excited about is a pending analysis of existing assessment data, which will provide a snapshot on learning loss and proficiency gaps for every single student in kindergarten through 8th grade in the Commonwealth. We will have the results of this analysis done by the start of the school year so that it can inform both school division strategies to personalize learning for every single learner, to be able to target resources and programs to those that are most behind and where the learning loss crisis is most evident. But it will also fuel the policy agenda that we will develop for the next legislative session. We also are committed to providing an annual report to the people of the Commonwealth on the progress we're making, where progress is not happening, and what we are going to do differently to get better results. Our third principle that will guide everything we do is around innovation. We're just going to prioritize innovation at every step. The status quo is not working for a growing number of our learners. We will create a culture of innovation that breaks the one-size-fits-all education that is a lasting stranglehold of the industrial age of the 19th century, even though every other part of our lives, of how we live and how we work, has changed. Families will have increased opportunities to choose the model of learning that best suits their child's needs. This could look like more course choices from online providers so that students wanting to take AP Physics could do so online if their homeschool doesn't offer it. It's more enhanced career and technical offerings and defined pathways so students can offer and earn industry recognized credentials while in high school, and that kids can also take dual enrollment advanced courses in higher education for college credit. We will prioritize exposure to the workplace and careers through internships and apprenticeships. In fact, there's a budget line item still being debated right now in the legislature to support the opportunity for every college student to have a paid internship before they graduate from college, and so that they have that connection between learning and work. One of the governor's signature pieces of legislation this term has been to expand our lab schools. The bill is still in the legislative process, but we have ideas coming from all parts of the Commonwealth and from partners from higher education, K-12, and community and business partners. Career pathway plans, a network of computer science high schools across the Commonwealth, a plan and a partnership between 4-year, 2-year, and a school division that allows seamless transitions and integration across institutions to meet student needs and to prioritize skill attainment in the most cost and time-effective approaches. These are all the ideas that are just pouring in as people are getting excited the idea of being able to do something differently. It will be exciting, and it will continue to be fun to watch and imagine how this innovation will change education in the Commonwealth. And finally, I want to share some of the non-negotiables in our approach to restoring excellence in education. First, schools and campuses must be conducive to learning. Our school buildings must be safe, they must be updated and prepared to deliver knowledge in a 21st century manner, and they must support physical and mental wellness inside those buildings. Our budget has historic funding for K-12 construction, including adequate broadband and technology to allow education to be delivered in the most effective and efficient manner possible. And you all know from reading every paper and listening to every news report, we are in the midst of a mental health crisis. Helping schools and campuses to be prepared to address this crisis and to focus on health and well-being is a priority of our administration. In partnership with the Secretary of Health and Human Resources, the Education Secretariat is launching a focus on improving mental well-being in our schools and on our college campuses, including a listening tour, a partnership with our college presidents, and a fall summit, which will lead to a set of policy recommendations that, again, will be introduced into the legislative process. Our second non-negotiable, we understand and we will make sure that restoring excellence is driving everything. And for that to happen, we need to have a reaffirmation that our institutions of learning, from early learning through our universities, will embody a stalwart commitment to free expression and the exploration of diverse ideas. Our democracy rests on the foundation that education must teach every generation how to think, not what to think. Here's where walking in every day into a building under Thomas Jefferson's words around free inquiry and reason inspire me to focus on what matters most. Our campuses, K-12 and higher education, must develop critical thinkers who know how to listen, how to debate, to question, to engage in thoughtful and respectful conversation and problem solving together with others who may not see the world the same way they do. These are the tools and life skills that are absolutely essential in our development as humans, as neighbors, and as members of a democracy. They should be a central part of education in our Commonwealth. Finally, discrimination of any form will not be tolerated. We will not allow the ascribing of traits, beliefs, or behavior based on race, gender, political beliefs, or religion. We will reinforce that every person has a right to rise and that the role of education is to provide them the tools and knowledge to do so. Admissions processes will be grounded in merit, and we will prioritize ensuring that those students who have traditionally been underrepresented in the governor's schools and our most selective institutions at K-12 and higher ed levels will receive the tools, the assistance, and the resources they deserve to be prepared to be eligible by merit. We are going to double down on working with elementary and middle schools to identify and nurture students who are demonstrating promise for accelerated pathways, and we will support their development and their learning journey so that our admissions processes can both maintain their rigor and the results are representative of the populations. This should be our shared goal, to maintain high standards, to reinforce the message to our youth that hard work and results matter in life, and that we should do everything possible to have as many of our children as possible be eligible by merit. Excellence should not be a finite good. As such, we are going to expand the quality opportunities for students throughout the Commonwealth. We are going to expand access to AP, to governor schools, to lab schools by creating more of them and ensuring that more learners are prepared for success in them. This expansion of access and excellence embodies Governor Youngkin's yes and approach. We can expand access to opportunity and still maintain high expectations for all students and our commitment to excellence. And we will. We cannot afford to lose another generation of children because we failed to hold our systems accountable, or we weren't willing to change our approach to education from the one-size-fits-all approach that isn't working for a growing number of our students. Our children deserve nothing less than a world-class education that prepares each of them for success in life. Thank you.
Madam Secretary, for an avowed data wonk, you bring a lot of passion to this stuff. It's fabulous. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us today. You put a lot out here just now. I wanted to ask you about a little bit of it, and then we'll open up the lines a bit. For starters, you know, at the very beginning, you mentioned that Virginia has this everything is awesome demeanor. As somebody who went to middle school and high school in Virginia, it's this. How do you come in with a new governor and get people to accept the need that you need the kind of aggressive, dramatic changes you're talking about? And how much resistance have you encountered in the State Department of Ed and school districts across the state?
So this is the challenge at this moment. I'm pulling up right now, which I study a lot, the 5-year plan that is put out from 2018 to 2023. And it's a lot of words. And then nowhere in the words are there data. It's all about making kids feel welcome and making sure we do this and that. And only when you get to Appendix A and you look at it, do you actually see a chart, and almost every single number on the chart is downward, says declining, declining, declining. This is our challenge. No one has been talking about the data. Nobody has been actually going and seeing what's going on. No one has been prioritizing telling the truth and letting folks know we are not as good as we had been, as we maybe thought we were. And it is really hard to get people to recognize that we need to change when they don't know that there's a problem. It really is a proverbial frog in the pot of water slowly getting heated up. And, you know, I'm a certified change agent person. I went through a course and I actually have a certificate in it. And the 3 key things to change management, which is what we're talking about here, right, is that for someone to change or for a system to change, there needs to be first awareness that there's a need to change. There needs to be a desire to change, and there needs to be knowledge of what that change entails and how do you change. We don't have the first 2 things because there's no awareness that we need to change because we keep telling everybody everything is awesome. And there's no desire to change because the status quo works really well for the adults in the system. And so that's how we're going to approach this, is that we are going to double down on getting information out and why this analysis of learning loss and where students are is going to change everything. We are literally going to be able to show people how far behind we are and create some urgency and some demand for change.
You know, on a related note, the coverage of the governor's victory in November was interesting because he said things that I thought sounded sensible and innocuous, like parents ought to have a say.
Right.
And a lot of the mainstream press coverage, and certainly the education press coverage, was all about racist dog whistles and division. So I'm curious how you all have gotten yourself situated and how that kind of coverage has or hasn't played out as you've started to work with stakeholders and try to get this agenda moving forward.
So it's there have been lots of conversations about the meaning of words, like equity and different things, and it's a typical education conversation where we're swirling and going around in circles. And yet those were really important things to lay out, right? Within an hour of being in office, the governor signed 2 executive orders, one to reaffirm the rights of parents especially around wearing masks and having a right to play a role in their kids' education and their health and well-being. And that sent a message that was very clear and will continue to be clear about parents matters in terms of making decisions. And the second one was about the teaching of divisive issues, and that issue I talked about in the last part of my remarks about the non-negotiables. We are discovering just more and more around what is happening in schools that is a distraction to focusing on academics. And so we're doing everything possible to reorient our schools back to what matters, which is, can our kids read? Are they able to do math that's required in a knowledge economy and in increasingly robust demands on data literacy and literacy itself and math and engineering and science? And so we're going to double down on that and just remind people that if we're distracted, and that's what this report is, right? It's a distraction of lots of words about making sure everyone feels represented. And yet we are failing our students when they cannot read and they're not prepared for life. And so that's what the first 3 months was about, was reminding people we're not going to be distracted by that.
On the divisive concepts point, I think, I'd love to give you a chance to just clarify for folks, because you will see this described as, divisive concepts. By that, do you all mean that schools shouldn't talk about Jim Crow, shouldn't talk about Korematsu, shouldn't talk about Tulsa? Are those divisive concepts because they're such painful parts of our history?
Absolutely not. So, and we've spent a lot of time in the legislature with this as well. The governor will say, I will say, the superintendent will say, we are going to teach history, all of our history, the good and the bad. And there is a lot of bad history, especially which we need to remind people of so we do not repeat it again. And so this is not about banning things. This is not about keeping topics off. What this is about is not having indoctrination happening in our classrooms. This is about stopping teachers walking in, or students walking into a classroom, or teachers walking into a bias training where they see the words white guilt and white privilege on a bulletin board. This is about not ascribing certain beliefs, making students, telling students that they should believe a certain way because of the color of their skin. Those are the issues that are divisive. Those are things that are discriminating against people based on how they look, where they came from, what their religion is. And those are the things that we're stopping, but we're doubling down. This is why our commitment to free speech and inquiry is so important, is that we must help our students learn as part of their education of learning how to deal with difficult concepts and diverse ideas and thoughts, and to understand, how do you grapple with that? How do you develop the skills so that you can be someone who can make decisions and be a critical thinker? I want my children to be uncomfortable in school. I want my children to be uncomfortable in school, not because someone is telling them they should be guilty. I want them to be uncomfortable because they are learning things that are making them think and ask questions and see things from a point of view that they've never had before. That's what an education is all about. That's what Thomas Jefferson's lines that I walk under every day are all about. Free inquiry and reason and learning how to think. Those are the things that we are going to double down in Virginia. We will not, but at the same time, we will not allow this discriminatory behavior to distract us.
You spoke broadly about higher ed. Curious if you can say a bit more specifically, both about, are there any plans at this point in the agenda, or is that still in the works? And then also kind of these other questions of, say, affordability and completion in college. Where are you guys on that?
We are very much there. So in addition to along free speech, free inquiry, and also how do we also start taking down the nanny state and reminding people that part of an education is learning how people are responsible for making good personal decisions as well. So part of the 3 months was also helping our campuses stop requiring masking and telling everybody what to do, but starting to have people make decisions based on facts and personal comfort levels, rather than having it be mandated all the time. So in addition to that, free inquiry, we also, as I've said, our North Star across our entire education system, we are reorienting everything to how is education geared towards preparing people for the jobs of today and of tomorrow. And so nowhere is that more important than in our community colleges and our higher education. So we're going to start calling success is no longer a 6-year graduation rate, which don't get me started on that one. I could talk for another 45 minutes about that. But we're actually going to start requiring our colleges to start reporting out percentage of your graduates who have a degree, how long it took them, at what debt level for them to get a job. And we're going to start reporting out that data, right? That this is about making sure that people are prepared for life. And that means, can they get a job? And how many didn't get a job? And so we are very concerned about the rising cost of higher education. We are going to do everything possible to keep those costs flat and low, and making sure that we are also having excellence as represented by the outcomes. And that means getting a job.
I mean, for many of us on the right, Mitch Daniels' tenure at Purdue has obviously been a North Star on this, pretty much a decade without moving up tuition. And have you guys talked to them about this? I'm curious.
We had a master class with Governor/President Daniels. He came in and the entire cabinet sat with him for 4 hours. So we are all, when we say we're going to build a best-in-class system, we are actually calling up best-in-class and asking them to help us figure out how to do that. So we are inspired by that conversation, and we will continue to be reaching out to folks across this country who have and are continuing to think about how to do things differently and to get results. That's what it means, right? We have a business leader who knows how to do best in class running the state, and we are going to be focusing on what excellence looks like. Let's define it, and then let's figure out who's doing it as well as they can as the best in class, and how do we learn from that and adopt it and adapt it in Virginia. So watch out. We're going to come, if you're doing something well, we're going to come learn from you, and we're going to put it into place in Virginia.
For anybody who knows you, it's absolutely no surprise how often you talked about data when it came back to teachers, school performance. Obviously, one of the walls that teacher evaluation, for instance, ran into a decade ago was evaluating teachers on reading and math scores, even if those reading and math scores weren't for their kids because they were teaching kindergartners, or even if they were teaching French. Curious, are we talking, when you talk about school and teacher performance, is it reading and math performance? How are we thinking about the teachers for whom those aren't the right measures? How much does this figure into your early conversations?
So we're not there yet with those details, but when you have Superintendent Balo back in a couple of months, we may be further ahead and she can answer that. But we're still figuring out. But the important piece here, right? We made huge progress back in 2008, 2010 with starting to really have a national conversation about being able to link up teacher value add to student learning. And it was a rich conversation. We had schools of ed involved. It was this whole feedback loop that was really important to getting better results. And part of the things I think that we messed up back then is that we linked it to our accountability systems, and all trust was gone. And as you know, I'm famous for saying, when we use data as a hammer and not as a flashlight, people tend not to want to use that information. And so we're going to be really conscious of how do we use information in a way that people trust it, they want to use it, and that it is being used for continuous improvement and getting better results. And so I think we've learned a lot about how to do this well, and we're hoping to do it in a way that has more positive impact and long-term impact on getting better results and attracting more people to the teaching profession, because teachers want to know how well they're doing in terms of making a difference in learning. So we'll get more of the specifics, and we'll work with you to make sure we develop it, Rick, so you can help us think through it.
I want to open. We got a bunch of questions coming in. I want to get to them. One of the things I specifically want to ask you about before we go there is you guys are tackling history standards. Mm-hmm. For those of us on the right, I think there's a lot of suspicion of when you start calling in the experts and what they're trying to put in standards nowadays. For folks on the left, given the treatment that they've given to Governor Youngkin throughout, how do you all intend to kind of reassure folks, at least the reasonable 80%, that this is something people can feel comfortable with? Any insight you can give us on that process?
So one of those is a commitment to transparency, right? That was my point. Transparency breeds trust. And we're going to be really transparent about who is looking at these, who's reviewing. We're going to, again, go back and talk to a lot of our friends at the national level who've gone through and have benchmarked the best standards in the country, learn from their processes, and probably beg, borrow, and steal from some of the things that they've been doing. And we're not going to start from scratch, right? A lot of people have been thinking about this for a long time. And to do this well and to do it efficiently, we have to learn from others too. So I don't know the exact process right now, but I know it's going to be transparent, and we're going to engage a lot of people. And we're going to make sure that we, especially on history, that my goal is that we're going to have the best history standards that are inclusive. They tell all of Virginia's stories and all of the American story, and ones that people can be proud of, and make sure that we can quell the concerns that we're going to be taking out key pieces of history and not telling everyone's stories. So just watch what we do. We will not be doing that. And these will probably be, I hope, the standard for the rest of the nation about great history standards.
All right, fantastic. All right, we've got a bunch coming in. Let me hit you with them, and you can respond as you will.
Okay.
One, where are you? Where's the administration on increasing education choices for children outside of the public school system, particularly when it comes to things like education savings accounts or opportunity scholarships?
So there are a lot of us, as you know from our backgrounds, that believe deeply in those opportunities. But where we are right now in the Commonwealth is that we have a whole lot of, as I said, change management work to do first, right? Of building that awareness and that urgency to do that. And Virginia has a lot that it has to work out right now in in a lot of mistrust of choices and of decisions that were made during massive resistance, which was an entire effort coordinated by a lot of political leaders to not allow there to be integration in our schools. And so that's part of the background with which we have to work when we talk about choice outside of public schools as well. So I think that when we start showing people literally how many kids are further behind, I hope that there is increasing demand, that we cannot wait. We need to use every single avenue possible to help serve children now. And that means, micro grants and tutoring credits and things like that. But that's something we're going to be working on. But for right now, our priority is going to be getting the data out there, focusing on our standards and our assessment and accountability system as a foundation. And then hopefully then working together with our state board and with the legislature, we can have those conversations about expanding choices outside the public system. But for right now, our focus is on innovation within the system and making sure that people understand where we are with our students and with learning loss and with opportunities to strengthen learning opportunities.
On a related note, a number of states have obviously suspended or curtailed state assessments with federal waivers from the Every Student Succeeds Act the last 2 years. Where is Virginia on that, and where do you plan to be next year?
We are committed to high standards, to high quality assessments, and to strong accountability systems. And while other states are dismantling, and probably the federal government is going to dismantle all kinds of requirements about assessments, we are going to double down on making sure we have an assessment system that is innovative, that is reflective of the innovations in the 21st century world, and at the same time provides quality, trusted, reliable, actionable information that people can use. So we are going to double down on good tests.
Where does early childhood education fit in the governor's agenda? What are you guys doing on that, and what do you plan to do on that?
So it's hugely great, and we have a phenomenal person that's leading it, who is very much about the data piece. And one of my favorite pieces of research to come out in the last several years is a data point that shows, based on University of Chicago data, that you cannot, even at the greatest K-12 schools, if children are arriving at school not ready and not on track for success by kindergarten, not the greatest schools cannot make a difference in making up because of just what's happened with the brain synapses and just the social emotional development and everything. So it's just the science tells us, the research tells us we have to invest in early learning. We need to make sure it's quality. In Virginia, we are committed to that being a system of choice, of it being provided through parent choice of public, private, nonprofit, church-based, any home-based. But that being said, we're also committed to that in that diversity of options, that we are going to have great information with which people to make decisions. We're going to have great funding levels so people can have access to quality. And we're going to have great transparency that people have information about quality and around results, and those results so that people can make good decisions. So we're feeling really good about where that is, and we're starting to see increases in our numbers. So watch us on that too.
On that funding piece, does that mean that the governor is going to push for additional funding?
We're hoping on historic investments in learning across the board.
How will you prioritize mental health recovery? You mentioned social emotional well-being. Can you talk a bit more concretely about what y'all are thinking?
So we are here. It's amazing. Every time I go out and meet with people, no matter what I'm talking about, even at the poetry finals, I was followed out into the parking lot by a middle school teacher who said, thanks for being here. Really glad you talked about this. I really want to talk to you about the most important thing, which is our kids are hurting. We have a mental health crisis. It's everything I'm hearing. And it's the same thing with the governor. Every conversation he has, every speech he gives, people are coming up talking about just our students in pain and hurting. So we're starting by listening, and we're starting by also finding out what resources, tools, and expertise we have at the state level. We're doing a better job of coordinating that and making sure that people have access to what already exists. And then we're starting to listen. We want to hear what's working, what's not working, and how can government, especially at the state level, do more to be responsive to what's happening in our K-12 systems and in our college campuses. So we have a plan over the next 4 months to do that, and then it will end up with a summit, and then with the policy agenda to focus on it. But it's big, it's a crisis, and we are going to make sure that it is something that we deal with.
So I've got a big old stack of questions, but I'm also cognizant that we have a promised end time and we need to let you get back to business. So there's one last question I'd be curious to hear you respond to, which is, how do you plan to balance your focus on kind of blocking and tackling educational improvement with what you talked about in terms of pushing back on some of the cultural concerns and some of the problematic, cultural developments in schooling? How do you guys kind of, do both of those, I guess, at the same time?
Right. So I think it's the North Star, right? We have to remind people that if our kids can't read and they can't do math and they're not prepared to get a job, that's really big. And that is the purpose of education. So it's kind of like, let's get focused on what really matters and remind people that is the purpose of education. And we're going to remind people that over and over. And it doesn't have to mean that we are not also making sure that we are, concerned with people's emotional well-being and their mental health and well-being. But first priority needs to be, how do we make sure that our kids are learning the basics and that we are making sure we're meeting kids' needs in that way as well. So one is, we're not going to be distracted by getting caught up in the culture wars. It's important to state our principles, and we will continue to do so. And one of those principles are, kids need to learn, and they need to learn how to read and then write and do math. And we're going to keep focused on that North Star at all points.
Madam Secretary, thank you so much for taking the time today. We appreciate your friendship, appreciate your kind words, and appreciate the job you're doing. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you, Rick. It's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to having a conversation in person sometime soon. So thank you, the whole AEI family. Many, many thanks.
Absolutely. I as well. All right. With that, that concludes the program for today. Thank you all for joining us. Thanks for all of your questions, including the dozens that I didn't get to. Sorry about that. And stay tuned for word of our next Ed the Right Way speaker coming up sometime later in the spring or early summer. And until then, please be well.